Proud sons of the North, my training is complete.
So you may remember in my video about alpha males, I responded to a guy called the Golden One.
Surprise flex.
I am ready to begin the training.
Today I want to discuss the Jewish question.
You're a goddamn fascist.
In that video I said I wasn't going to argue against white nationalism. I just assumed that it was wrong. And of course that's pretty irritating to white nationalists who want to bait me into arguing with them.
So any mention of Jewish power is refuted by saying Nazi. This is why race realism and ethno-nationalism are becoming more popular. You people have no arguments. Typical femi-cultist moonshine. You are so clearly subsumed by the totalizing effects of the femi-monolith that alternative codices of gender relationality are unequivocally out of your grasp, and its subjects are psychopathologized to a degree that could in and of itself be aptly pre-codified with similar heuristic ease as pathological. Racism and sexism are nothing more than heresiological heuristics for the non-obedient agents. You have no argument against the Golden One or white nationalism, only bitter insults and reductio ad Hitlerum.
So in this video I want to go through the exercise of explaining exactly what's wrong with white nationalism, both to clear myself of the accusation of relying only on insults, and, possibly, to persuade some people who may sympathize with white nationalist views.
Now, the conventional liberal wisdom is that you shouldn't argue with white nationalists, because it grants them a kind of legitimacy when you give them a seat at the discussion table. But at this point, I think a lot of people privately or publicly hold white nationalist views already, and the public may never hear strong arguments against them. Also, speaking as a mentally ill, alcoholic transvestite with less than a third the YouTube subscribers of the second largest channel about the lives of ants, I think the danger of my being the one to catapult white nationalism into mainstream acceptability is pretty remote.
So in this video I'm not going to use the words racist or Nazi, even though those are completely fair and accurate descriptions. I don't need to insult these fascist fucks, because I believe that reason will prevail. So in this video I'm going to remain at all times rational, calm, relaxing, soothing.
Why don't you just lie back and relax? And I'm going to crinkle this page I tore out of Mein Kampf, and we can just have a nice, soothing conversation about the wave of far-right extremism sweeping through Europe. Jews. Part 1. White nationalism with a friendly face. The Golden One's recent videos are all about how to be a good representative for the nationalist cause. That is, how to tone down the, I said I wasn't going to say Nancy, the monstrous lunatic aspects of the program. And apparently that means wearing a suit, not jacking off, and protecting the racial purity of Skyrim.
Skyrim belongs to the Nords.
It also means trying to distance the movement from the idea that it's based on racial hate, something white nationalists have been doing for a long time. Here's the website of a group called the Loyal White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, which seems to have been designed around the same time as the promotional website for the 1996 movie Space Jam. The website promises to dispel some of the lies told about us by the liberal news media. Let me start by addressing the repeated falsehood that we're a hate group. Let me assure you that nothing could be further from the truth. We do not hate any group of people. We hate drugs, homosexuality, abortion, and race mixing, because these things go against God's law, and they are destroying all white nations. So this sounds pretty similar to the Golden One's bizarre cocktail of not drinking, not coming, not having sex with brown people, and generally shunning everything worth doing. Minus the Christianity, plus a little light, high fantasy Odinism.
My Nordic masculinity has grown as firm and robust as the hammer of Thor.
Stormfront admin Jack Boot, who's definitely not a Nazi, posts a white nationalism FAQ from the 90s where it's explained that the desire of white nationalists to form their own nation has nothing to do with superiority or inferiority. In fact, formation of a white nation removes any possibility of white dominance of other races, as well as the plausibility of the accusation that whites wish to dominate others.
So this is the standard white nationalist PR move. You say, what? Hate group? That's not us, that's not what we're about. We're just a bunch of God-loving folks who take pride in our own people. And where is the harm in that?
Part 2. What's the harm in that? So we've got the KKK pretending to stand up for diversity, Stormfront users with traditional right-wing extremist, Symbology claiming not to be white supremacists, and the Golden One saying that poor maligned Hitler didn't actually hate the Jews.
Now, a lot of mere mortals with a pleb tier understanding of the world say like, oh, Hitler hated Jews. No, he actually didn't. If you think he did, ask yourself, why did he have a Jewish chauffeur and bodyguard? Why were there so many Jews fighting in the Wehrmacht? Hitler's battle was against international Jewry, international finance.
I hope none of you are buying any of this. Still, I think perhaps the Golden One raises an important point. Namely, is the problem with Hitler really that he hated the Jews? I mean, I think just about everyone harbors racial animosity of some kind. In my case, I happen to hate the Belgians.
Fuck this waffle. But the point is not what your private emotions are so much as what you do with them. So it's not hate per se that's the problem, so much as the politics it produces. It's what Hitler did and said that distinguishes him. And what he did is kill all the European Jews. And why'd he do that? Well, in the name of purging Europe of all non-Aryan peoples, which is precisely the goal of white nationalism. Now I know people are gonna say, see, you're just resorting to talking about Nazis and the Holocaust. Argument ad Hitlerum. To which I respond that when the subject at hand is ethnic cleansing inspired by anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, Nazis and the Holocaust are pretty goddamn relevant, wouldn't you say? And of course I realize that it isn't going to be very convincing to white nationalists, since most of these fucking people are Holocaust deniers, and if the overwhelming evidence described by pretty much every academic historian who looks at the issue isn't enough to convince them that it happened, I doubt that anything I can say will be. When you're so deep in a conspiracy theory that all opposing evidence is immediately dismissed as some kind of Jewish hoax, well, there's not much arguing with you.
Though I have to wonder why people whose explicit goal is the ethnic cleansing of so-called white nations find it so impossible to believe that other people with that exact same goal actually took a swing at it.
Now, white nationalists will tell you that ethnic cleansing can actually be non-violent. After all, couldn't non-whites simply be peacefully banished from so-called white nations? Well, probably not. There are around 39 million African Americans and 57 million Hispanic people in the United States alone. Where are they going to go? What will the people in the new places think about welcoming around 100 million refugees?
How's this gonna work, guys?
I mean, even alt-right Germany began with non-violent methods of coercing Jewish emigration. It was only later that it escalated to attacks on their property, ghettoization, mass incarceration, and finally extermination.
So excuse me for not feeling very reassured.
That Stormfront FAQ proposes that white Americans could simply cede lost territory and move to uninhabited lands.
And you know, guys, I think that is a great idea. Why don't you all move to your little colony in Wyoming and leave everyone else alone? Don't take your computers with you, delete your social media accounts. Because that is a Jewish invention.
Part 3. Whiteness. Traditionally, nationalism is a political ideology that places communal identification with a nation or people at the center of politics. National identity usually involves a shared language, history, and geographical locus. So, while say German nationalism or Japanese nationalism are both terrible political philosophies, they at least kind of make sense, insofar as there's sort of such a thing as the German people or the Japanese people. White nationalism, on the other hand, is way less coherent, because whiteness is an amorphous and fairly recent social construct. At the time of the Roman Empire, different ethnic groups living in Europe would never have recognized themselves as belonging to the same race. To ancient Romans, Gauls, Saxons, and Celts, the idea that all Europeans belong to one people would have been about as palatable then as the idea that Africans and Europeans belong to the same race is to contemporary, meme-based alternative ethnocentrists? But the Golden One mixes Nordic, Celtic, and Greco-Roman imagery together as if all historical European ethnicities are interchangeable. But this is a fictional unification that only makes sense under the relatively modern concept of whiteness. And if you unweave that fictional unity, it becomes pretty hard to take seriously the utopian vision of a unified white nation. As recently as the 20th century, Irish people were treated as a kind of racial underclass in England and the US, and Nazi race theory divided the European race into at least 5 subraces, of which only the Nordic race were considered the master race. So what makes white nationalists think that these kinds of race conflicts won't re-emerge in a new white ethno-state obsessed with racial purity? And all of this is to say nothing of the fact that having even the purest European ancestry is still not enough to guarantee your membership in the category of whiteness. If you're Jewish, you're out. If you're a race traitor, you're out. If you're a degenerate beta leftist pleb tier subhuman dog, you're out. Because being a good white person also apparently involves doing deadlifts and not taking drugs or masturbating, which is all part of what the Golden One calls race of spirit.
The race of spirit, as it were. So all whites obviously aren't equal, and I don't want anyone to think that I love all whites so much because just because the way they're born. There are subhumans of all races, to quote Joseph Goebbels.
This is all so convoluted and abstract. It seems like what white nationalists really care about is the idea of whiteness, not actual white people, most of whom they seem not to regard very highly.
There are plenty of subhuman, degenerate, pleb tier whites, such as this guy right here. You can see, oh, this is a white guy, but you can also see on him that he is inferior when it comes to the spirit.
I fucked an Argonian.
And this brings us nicely to our next topic. Part 4. White Genocide.
So, the central idea of modern white nationalist theory is that white people need their own ethno-states in order to prevent something called white genocide. So what the fuck is white genocide? Well, genocide is usually defined as the attempt to exterminate an entire ethnic or religious group, but white nationalists use the term to refer to the immigration of non-white people into majority white nations. So, you can see how that's not really genocide, because instead of people being killed, it's just like there's more of a different group of people being... Man, this is so fucking stupid, I don't even know how to start arguing with it.
Well look, one way we could think of this is in terms of historical genocides that began with new migrants. So for instance, the Europeans who settled North America took over native land, they killed and enslaved native populations, they forcibly imposed their own government and religion. That's at least in the neighborhood of a genocide. So the question to ask is, are Muslim or Hispanic immigrants killing and enslaving millions of whites? Are they forcing whites to convert to their religions and speak their language at gunpoint? No, they're not. Basically, the fear of white genocide is the unfounded fear that non-white people are going to treat whites as badly as they've historically treated others. Now I want to reiterate that it seems like what white nationalists are really worried about defending isn't actual white people, but the idea of whiteness. And things like race mixing threaten that idea. Miscegenation doesn't muddy anyone's blood. That's just not an actual thing. What it muddies is the already pretty sketchy concept of whiteness. And I should say that if I really thought that American or Swedish culture was dying out, I actually would be kind of sad about it. If the English language, for instance, was in decline, I'd say, yeah, we should do something to save it. But what's happening is exactly the opposite. I mean, European and especially Anglophone culture is the most dominant in the entire world. English is spoken all over India and Africa, it's taught in Chinese schools, it's the lingua franca of the internet.
So this whole thing is preposterous. You're taking the most dominant, the most imperialistic culture in the world, and you're saying, this is the one we really need to be worried about. And that, I mean, goddamn, I'm 28 years old. I have a master's degree in philosophy. Why am I arguing on the internet with this golden man?
My cousin is out fighting dragons. And what do I get? Nazis.
Part 5. Concluding remarks. White nationalism is an affront to everything good about Western civilization. Ideas like individual freedom and religious tolerance are the best products of European political thought. Though white supremacists in practice, the founders of the United States designed a society capable of tolerating a diversity of thought, speech, and custom, and a franchise that includes people of different origins and religions. White nationalism wants to tear it all down for the sake of some communitarian ethno-state in which skin color is citizenship and dissent is treason. White nationalism is therefore incompatible with the values of liberal democracy to an extent perhaps rivaled only by political Islam. At least in theory. In practice, white nationalist ideas are much more dangerous to liberal values in Western countries, since they have way more influence here over governments and institutions than Islamism does.
So I don't care if you wear a suit, if you insist you don't hate other races, or if you veil your ideas in irony and memes. White nationalism is wrong, immoral, and nonsensical, and it has no place in liberal societies, except in the way that, say, Islamism does, as a kind of fringe test of the limits of toleration. And the golden one. If you're watching this, we can't really be friends as long as you're like this, and I don't expect you to ever change your mind. But I want to say that if you do, well, I'll be waiting for you, in some faraway tavern of degeneracy, with a horn of mead.
Special thanks to Sarek, Pofo, Thea Raintree, David the Benevolent Malevolence, Michael C. Johnson, J. Michael Comfort, Kat Stas, Nick Wolf, Garrett Laffey, Eris, Jason Walter, Carter Kalchik, Phil, Ola Strandman, A Mysterious Benefactor, Robert Phillips, T-Shades, Stephen Levi, Ray Hung, Romy Koya, Aaron Ho, Neil Tak, Stealer of Souls, Voron, No, Bottled Sky, Raymond Heinrich, Heterodox, Roman Olyashev, Stove Panico, Marcus Rentonius, and the other patrons who sponsored my hypothermia treatment after I filmed this video. Patron Thea Raintree asks, I've dated a fair amount of white men that refuse to date white women. Something about this feels wrong, but I can't put my finger on exactly what. Well, let's see. First, I'll say that lots of people have racial dating preferences, and sometimes they're just that, preferences. But there are a couple ways this can go wrong. If a guy has a full-on fetish for, say, black women or Asian women, that could lead him to treat them as particular instances of a fetishized stereotype rather than as individual people, and that's obviously not great for the people he's dating. The other way I can see this going wrong is if the guy's preference is the product of some kind of general hostility toward white women. So if he's like, fuck white women, I'm done with them, that's probably a sign he's got some issues to work out. But the frustrating thing about this is you really just have to judge it on a case-by-case basis. In any case, congratulations on annoying white nationalists by dating outside your race. I actually love the Belgians, I'm so sorry.